Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Forum Focus. Our focus tonight, President Trump set to deliver his upcoming State of the Union address on February 24th. Expectations are already building around what themes, priorities, and messaging will define the moment. These speeches often serve as a roadmap, not just for policy, but for how an administration wants to frame the national conversation moving forward. Increasingly becoming part of that conversation and part of U.S. policy are attacks on countries that once were thought of as allies. Coming up in just moments, I'll speak to the former U.S. National Security Advisor and former UN Ambassador John Bolton. But first, joining me now to break down what we should be watching for is Brittany Martinez. She is the Executive Director of Principles First. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Wyatt.
Of course, let's just start out with what a speech like this means. The State of the Union obviously happens every year, but what is particularly, I guess, unique, or what should people be watching for in particular with respect to this year's?
Well, I think what we see happening with ICE is something that's obviously going to be needs to be addressed. As always, the economy is at the top of people's minds. So we're going to need to have the president be very honest about that. You know, he often likes to say, "Oh, this is the best economy, the best we've ever seen, et cetera." But how are Americans feeling? And reports are conflicted. A lot of Americans are saying they're not feeling super optimistic about the economy moving forward. And so those are the two biggest things that I'd be looking for. And I guess a third would be bringing the country together. I would say that we're in a very divisive place, unfortunately, and we really need him to be a leader and have the sort of rhetoric that is becoming of the office of the president to bring us together as a country.
You mentioned the administration's deportation efforts, what they've been doing with ICE. One interview I did recently was with the former DHS secretary under President Obama, Jay Johnson, and what he told me particularly stood out. He said that ICE obviously, should serve a purpose and that Customs and Border Patrol should serve a purpose, but that the administration has totally weaponized that purpose in favor of their political agenda. And I wonder if you would agree that in many ways that speaks to kind of a broader pattern throughout this administration where they take something that once was thought of as traditional and all of a sudden make it into something that they can weaponize, as I said, in favor of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that what we've seen under this administration is a lot of executive overreach and just overreach in general. I mean, think about it. ICE has existed for about 20 years, and I feel like people are hearing about it for the first time, really. And it is because of the chaos that we've seen on the streets when it comes to these protests and, and a lot of what I would say cruel behavior. I think that ICE should serve a purpose, and that is to
Hmm.
ensure that in the United States that our immigration policies aren't abused and that our generosity isn't abused. But when they abuse their own power, that becomes a problem. And I think that's what we're seeing now. I would posit that I think that the next administration is going to come in, probably get rid of ICE in its current iteration, and
Hmm.
reestablish something else with a different name.
One thing that I think the president has been focused on, not publicly anyways, but certainly him and his team behind the scenes, has been making sure that people who voted for him in the last election are actually staying loyal to his movement, given a lot of what he said he was going to campaign on, he has not done. He campaigned, obviously, the big one is on releasing the Epstein files, and we've just seen kind of a complete runaround on them. You saw Pam Bondi give what can't even be described as testimony just because of how much she was running around members of Congress as they were, asking legitimate questions as the survivors were in the room. And she wouldn't even look at them. She was, tiptoeing around the issue the entire time. And I wonder from your perspective, as someone who was a Republican but has spoken out against Donald Trump and some of the rhetoric that he has used, how you foresee him potentially addressing that nuance.
Yeah, I think what we see is that it's a president who doesn't really like dissent within his party. Dissent is important. It makes sure that we don't have yes men for everything.
Yeah.
It allows opportunity to have discussions about things and really honest discussions that are important. So when you have folks like Pam Bondi yesterday, I think that when she went up there, I mean, I was really surprised about the behavior. I think it was quite erratic and unhinged, to be honest with you. And we expect more from someone in her position. Like you're expected to answer the tough questions, and so for her to sort of behave that way in Congress, I thought that was quite embarrassing, to be honest with you. And so, yes, we've seen people who were staunch supporters like Marjorie Taylor Greene, former Congresswoman now known as Marjorie Taylor Brown by President Trump because she disagreed with him once or
Mhm.
twice. So I think he expects 100% loyalty, but isn't good about giving it back.
Just quickly, about 30 seconds or so, but do you think that there is any room in the Republican Party for voices like yourself to speak out when things like the Epstein files, aren't being, transparent, people aren't being transparent about it?
I think so. Whether the administration agrees with me or not is something else to be said. But I think it's important. And that's why I still consider myself a
Yeah.
Republican, because this is not the Republican Party that I've known. And we need to make sure that we're moving
Yeah.
forward as a party and as a nation in the right way.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. Brittany Martinez is back with us right after this. Stay with us.